Hi again, Mark here from TalkingBass.net. This lesson I'm going to continue with the music theory series and the topic of chords for bass. So we've already covered the major and minor triads in a variety of different positions. So now let's have a look at the remaining triads, the augmented and the diminished. This should be a fairly quick lesson since we can base these chord shapes around the ones that we've already used. So first of all, let's take a look at the augmented triad. If you've been keeping up with the music theory lessons, then you'll know that augmented triads are the same as major triads, but with a sharpened or augmented fifth. So here's a C major arpeggio, C, E, G, or root major third perfect fifth, and here's a C augmented triad, C, E, G sharp, or root major third augmented fifth. So all we need to do to get an augmented chord is sharpen the fifth note of the major shape. But as you might have realised, we missed out the fifth on the major voicings, well, most of the major voicings, in order to clean up the sound and get rid of some of that muddiness. So this is going to mean either bringing the fifth back into play on some of those shapes, or we're going to need to use chord voicings that we have already that include the fifth. So first of all, let's have a look at the major voicings that we've already used. So built from an E string root, we have these two chords, okay? So I'm going to use a G major. So we've got that one with the root and its octave and the third on top. And then here's another one, which is the root, the fifth and the third on top. And that one's in a bit of a lower position than this one, even though they're both coming from the same G there on the 15th fret. Okay. And now let's have a look at the three voicings that we've got for a major triad starting on the A string root, okay? So I'm going to use a C major chord. So we've got this one. That's C major, root, third, fifth, and then we've got this one, which is the root, the third, and the octave, and then we've got this one, which is the root, the fifth, and the third on top. Okay. Just like the three arpeggio patterns that I covered recently in another one of the music theory lessons, these chord shapes can be seen as upper and lower, or upper, middle, and lower patterns, depending on where we are at any one time. So those A string based patterns would be upper, because it's further up, middle and lower, and the E string patterns would be upper and lower all around that root note. There's no middle pattern there. There's a whole bunch of other voicings that we can use as well that aren't based on a bass root note. But because we're playing unaccompanied and we need to outline the chord progression and the root movement, we're only looking at chords that contain that root note. Now, if a band's playing behind us, or we're playing more of a harmonised melody or a moving chordal line, then the root note can be missed out, or it can be played in another area of the chord altogether, rather than on that bottom of the chord. But for now, we're going to stick to chords that are built from that solid root foundation in the bass. So now let's modify these five major chord shapes to change them into augmented chords, obviously just by augmenting that fifth. So first let's look at the E string based patterns. So take a G major chord using our original E string shape, starting here at the 15th fret of the E string, and then the octave G there at the 17th fret of the D string, and the B here at the 16th fret of the G string. Now because there's no fifth, because we took it out to clean it up, we need to pop the fifth back into the shape using that D there at the 17th fret on the A string. Okay, so now we have that major bar chord, which is very similar to the one that you get on a guitar. So we have G, D, G, B, 15th fret E string, 17th fret on the A string and the D string, and then the 16th fret on the G string. So that's G major, and then we take that D, that 17th fret on the A string, and we take it up a semitone to give us that D sharp, the augmented fifth. So now we end up with this pattern. Okay, so that's the G, 15th fret E string, D sharp, 18th fret A string, G, 17th fret D string, and the B, the 16th fret on the G string. Okay, so that's a complete G augmented. Now, of course, like the original major bar chord that we used, using all four strings, this augmented chord can become a little bit muddy, but we'll stick with it for now, because if we get rid of the octave there, which is one of the notes we could remove because we've already got a G down here at the bottom, we end up with a bit of a strange pattern using the E string, A string and G string. So it's quite weird fingering pattern on the fretting hand, and it's a weird fingering pattern on the picking hand as well. So for now, we'll just stick with the complete bar chord shape, okay? So now let's move on to the other E string based major chord, which is there. So we've got the 15th fret on the E string for the G, then we've got the D at the 12th fret of the D string, and then we've got the B up at the 16th fret of the G string. So all we need to do now is take that D, the 12th fret of the D string, up a semitone to the D sharp, and we have the augmented chord. So much easier to create an augmented chord out of this pattern than the other. Okay, because they're all already there. So now we have obviously the G, 15th fret of E string, then we've got the 13th fret there, the D sharp on the D string with the first finger, and then we've got the 4th finger taking the B up there at the 16th fret of the G string, okay, and the 3rd finger's taking the G on the bottom. Okay, so that's another G augmented. So now let's move on to the A string based patterns and try a C augmented chord. So first we have the C major chord here in the order 15th fret on the A string, 14th fret on the D string, and the 12th fret on the G string. C, E, G, okay? Root, 3rd, 5th. So now all we need to do to create a C augmented is take that first finger there on the 12th fret of the G string and take it up to the G sharp. Okay, and that gives us a C augmented. So fairly straightforward pattern there. So again, 15th fret of the A string there, the C, the E at the 14th fret of the D string, and the G sharp at the 13th fret of the G string. Using fingers 3, 2, 1. Okay, C augmented. Now for the next A string major pattern, we have this major chord here, which is the C, E, C, so the root 3rd octave pattern. 15th fret A string, 14th fret D string, and 17th fret G string. Now this one's going to cause a bit of a problem making an augmented shape from it because there's no 5th again, and we've only got 3 strings to play with. So one way to do this is to actually remove the 3rd and then put the 5th in there, the augmented 5th there. Okay? So we've got the root, the augmented 5th, and then the octave. So we're only using the root and the sharpened 5th. There's no 3rd. Now that's an incomplete augmented triad, but because the sharpened 5th has got such a dramatic sound, it does still imply that augmented triad. It's not ideal, but it'll do for now. So we've got the C with the first finger there at 15th fret of the A string, then we've got the G sharp with the 4th finger there on the 18th fret of the D string, and then the 3rd finger takes the C there, 17th fret on the G string. Okay, so we've got that C augmented, and now that C augmented. Now the next augmented chord is going to be a bit of a big stretch. It's going to be based on that major chord that we used that had the 3rd up on the top. So it was root, 5th, 3rd, and that was C, G, E. Okay, so C there at the 15th fret of the A string with the first finger, and then the second finger took the 5th there, the G, at the 17th fret of the D string, and then we stretch all the way up to this E here at the 21st fret on the G string. So to change that into an augmented chord, we take that G there at the 17th fret and move it up to the 18th fret on the D string. Okay, so we've got that C, G sharp, E. And we're using the 1st, the 3rd, and the 4th fingers. And it's a little bit of a bigger stretch. To practice this, you're probably best moving it down slightly. So if we were to play it at the A, we'd have an A augmented there. We'd have the 12th fret of the A string, the 15th fret of the D string, and the 18th fret of the G string. Now the way to remember this is, because it's quite a large chord, is to think of move up 3 frets or a minor 3rd and then across a string onto the D string, and then up another 3 frets or minor 3rd and then the next string. Okay, so we've got that note, then 1, 2, 3, next string, then 1, 2, 3, next string. Okay, that's one way of remembering that pattern. Okay, so back at the C augmented. Okay, so that's the augmented chords. You want to play around with them and get a feel for that spacey sound. I tend to use the third finger pattern of the root 3rd 5th on the A string here. You know, that just tends to fall under my fingers more. And for the A string one, I generally play that one. I don't really play this big bar chord one. I try to maneuver myself into a position so I can use that one. These augmented chords, they sound kind of dissonant and very spacey. And when I first heard them, I thought, oh, it's a weird chord. Sounds just like a weird noise. But eventually someone says, oh, it's very much like a sci-fi film, very spacey. And since then I've thought, oh yeah, it does, it has that kind of feel. And it's very kind of 50s B-movie, you know, like Ed Wood style. Cheapness. So now let's take a look at the diminished triad. I'll quickly run through these shapes in the same kind of order as I did with the augmented chord. Last time we were modifying the major chord, but this time we're modifying the minor chord and flattening the 5th as opposed to sharpening it. So if you've ever had a problem, or if you ever have a problem remembering these chords, just use the major or minor chord shapes and flatten or sharpen the 5th depending on whether you want augmented or diminished. So first of all, let's build one from the E string. So there's the G minor, and what we're going to do is we're going to take that shape and then we're going to get rid of the octave and put in the flattened 5th down there. So to cut a long story short, we've got the G there, 15th fret of the E string, then we've got the D flat at the 16th fret of the A string, and then we've barred the first finger across, so I'm taking this B flat here on the G string, the 15th fret with that same first finger. So it's a pretty easy pattern. You could put the octave in if you wanted, but I'm just going to stick with those 3 notes for now. Okay, so G, D flat, and B flat. So it's barred first finger and just drop that second finger down on the next fret up. Okay. Now the next E string based diminished chord is a bit of a pain. I never use it. I've never really seen anybody else use it, but I want to keep some consistency to the lesson, so I'll go over it anyway. And you might be a masochist and you might really want to try it out just for the sake of the stretch, but you'll see what I mean with it. So here we have that G there, 15th fret of the E string, and then you want to take this D flat on the D string, okay? So there's the diminished 5th, so that's the 11th fret of the D string, and then your little finger comes down here on the B flat up there at the 15th fret of the G string. Okay, so it is a full, you know, diminished chord, and actually doesn't sound as muddy as that one. It's actually a lot cleaner. So if you can get that stretch and move into it quickly, then you know, by all means. But I don't think I'll really be using it that much. But you know, it's there anyway if you want to use it. So now let's move on to the A string based voicings. So we'll look at the C diminished. So first of all, we have this pattern starting on the C, 15th fret of the A string, and then we've got the minor third there, the E flat at the 13th fret of the D string, and again it's a fairly big stretch. You've got the first finger there for the 11th fret, the G flat on the G string. Okay, so it's consecutive minor thirds there. You've got this one and then this one. So you can really see the kind of theory behind it there. You've got the 2 stacked thirds, okay? So C, E flat, G flat, C diminished. Now let's try this C diminished with C, 15th fret on the A string, with the first finger, then the second finger we take the G flat there at the 16th fret of the D string, and then we've got the octave there. So again, we've missed out the minor third, but that diminished 5th again, it's there, and that's enough to provide a diminished triad feel, just as we did with the augmented triad there. No major third in that, but you know, you've got that sharpened 5th. So here, root, flat 5, octave. Now the final shape is the same as that last one, but with a minor third on the top rather than the octave. So we have the C, 15th fret on the A string, G flat, the 16th fret on the D string, and then the E flat up here at the 20th fret. Okay, so first finger, second finger, fourth finger. And it's got quite a gap between the flattened 5th and that minor third up at the top, which can give it either what you would call a distinctive feel or a bit too big a gap. But as opposed to but you might be after that sound, or you might be in a position where you need it. So there it is, C, G flat, and E flat. So that's the triads covered. So we've now got the major, minor, augmented and diminished chords all at our disposal. So now you can try some chord progressions that use these particular chords. Now I'll be doing some lessons devoted to these chords in isolation in upcoming weeks, but for now I'll give you some chord sequences just to give you an idea of how they're sometimes used. So both the diminished and augmented triads have got these dissonant sounds that can be used on their own for effect, like that augmented triad for the sci-fi kind of vibe that I was talking about, or a diminished chord for the stereotypical horror sound, and both chords can actually also be found in the major and minor keys. The diminished triad is chord 7 in the major key, and it's also chord 2 and chord 7 in the minor key, if we use the harmonic minor scale. So we would have B diminished in C major, or we'd have D diminished or B diminished in C minor. The augmented triad is chord 3 of the minor key, so we could have an E flat augmented chord in C minor. But you're actually more likely to find these chords in everyday use as a consequence of chromatic voice leading or substitution in fairly normal progressions. Now I know that sounds a little bit sophisticated, but just bear with me on this one. So diminished chords can be used as passing chords, moving between chords that are a tone apart. So that can sound like this. Okay, so that chord progression is C major, then C sharp diminished, then D minor, then G major. So it's a 1 chord, and then we have this sort of flattened second or sharpened first diminished chord, and then we've got 2 and 5. Okay, so C major, C sharp diminished, D minor, G major, and that C sharp diminished is moving between the C and the D, so it's connecting the two. And the reason that that works so well is because if we take that C major there, C, E, G, if we look at C sharp diminished, there's that pattern that we used. We've got C sharp, E, and G. Okay, so it's almost the same chord, apart from that the root's changed. So it's C, E, G, C sharp, E, G. So it's only the C that's changing in moving up to then the D minor. Okay? And then all those notes move up to the D minor. Okay? So when I mentioned that these diminished and augmented chords are used as a consequence of voice leading, you can see what I mean there with the... It's actually one of the voices moving up, just moving, bridging that gap between the C and the D, okay? And this, when a diminished chord's used like this, it's called a diminished passing chord, okay? Because we're bridging that gap between that C major and the D minor. I mean, we could just stay on the C major. Chord 1, chord 2, chord 5, but now okay, so you can hear that's actually bridging that gap, so it's a diminished passing chord. Okay, so now let's try that chord progression again, but this time we'll use chords based on an E string root note. So we'll play in F. Okay, so we've got F major, then we've got F sharp diminished, then we've got G minor, and then C major. So there's the 1, F major, chromatic passing, the diminished passing chord, and then 2, G minor, to 5, C major. Okay. Now let's look at a common chord progression that might use an augmented chord. So again, we're going to be in C. So go to a C major chord, root 3rd, 5th there, and then I'm going to go to a C augmented. Okay, so we're just going to move this top note up to a G sharp, so G to G sharp, 12th fret to 13th fret on the G string. And then we're going to move that top note up another semitone, keeping the C and the E exactly where they are, which gives us that chord and then we're going to move up to this chord, which is actually a C7, which leads us into an F. So all we're doing is we're taking that C and the E on the bottom, 15th fret and 14th fret. They stay exactly where they are, and we just move that top note up a semitone at a time. Here I've had to change position a little to accommodate it, but it's still the same C, E and an A on the top, and then C, E and B flat. Okay. Which then leads us into F major. Okay. So we are actually in effect moving through the chords C major, C augmented, C6 and C7 before leading into this F. And that's as a consequence of this melodic line on the top, moving through the scale degrees 5, sharp 5, 6 and flat 7. So again, it's not really that we're seeing these vertical chord shapes as, you know, major, augmented, 6, dominant 7. It's just the voice leading. It's as a consequence of the voice leading rather than actually, you know, writing it right. Okay, we're going to have this chord and then this chord and then this chord. It's a melodic line and the chords have come secondary to that. So now let's try that same chord sequence but from a G major chord starting on this A string, okay? So we've got the G major there, that popular pattern. So we've got the G 15th fret on the E string, D 12th fret on the D string and the B the 16th fret on the G string. You should be used to that pattern by now. So then that D is going to be the one that's going to move up. So we get the D there, G augmented, as we move that first finger up to the D sharp, 13th fret. Then we move it up to the 14th fret. We end up with that G6. And then eventually you move it up to the 15th fret there, giving us that G7. Okay, which moves into the C. Okay. So have a play through these examples. I've written them all down in the PDF, but don't worry too much about them for now because, as I've said, I'm going to be devoting some lessons to the use anyway. It's really more important to know that some of these chords can be labelled in certain ways, even though the actual sound and writing of them is more a result of that individual, the moving individual voices around within the chords. What's labelled as the major, augmented, major 6, dominant 7 chord movement, like in that last example, is simply a consequence of the voice leading. And remember that music was being written long before the invention of chord symbols. So that's it for triads. The next of these chord lessons I'll be moving on to 7th chords, when we'll really be able to start diversifying the playing. So as usual, visit talkingbass.net for more lessons, articles and downloads, and subscribe to the newsletter to receive the free scale reference guide, and you'll also get updates on all the new lessons too. Also, if you like these lessons, make sure to get in touch and like the video using the button below. I'm happy to answer any questions that you've got, and it's good to hear from viewers and get a feel for what stuff to release next. Okay, see you later.